It's not that there was little to be said about the night. It's just that he said very little. There wasn't much point explaining that I wasn't any sort of criminal, bandit, thief, or trespasser, but that I was lost from my home with the sole intent of returning to such a place, and had no interest in endangering whatever sort inhabited this village. No, there wasn't much sense in explaining anything, when he did most of his communicating with the uncomfortable end of a rather pointy stick. Could I have slipped away? Perhaps. But the territory was unfamiliar, and once again I found myself stripped of any resources. Alone, without tools or resources, amongst the night dwellers in the wood did not seem like something I would find enjoyable. Even still, when I found myself on the wrong end of an iron door, abandoned even by my imprisoner, I wondered if the creepers would have been more accommodating. I'm not much of one for tight spaces, so I broke my way out the side-facing window and dashed to an unlocked building at the end of the village. Not seeing any pursuers, I allowed myself to rest in the larder that night. The next morning, I realized I had found my way into a church worshipping some sort of horned deity. I helped myself to the available bread and took a look at what was most likely their holy book. Religion was never really my strong suit, and seeing as I couldn't read their text anyways, it would have to stay that way. My reading was interrupted by a priest who seemed equally surprised by my arrival as he was amused by my prison break. He offered his knowledge of waystones if I assisted him in removing a witch's thrall and rescuing his precious buffalo. I informed him killing things wasn't really my job, and almost by divine intervention, I was roped into ending an Enderman. Once that was over, I snuck my way over to the witch's tower, where I was almost immediately spotted. She didn't seem to chase me outside though, so I crept up to the buffalo pen to see what I was dealing with. Something about attacking the golem just felt wrong, and I didn't quite trust the priest's tone, so I went with my gut and confronted the witch instead. As suspected, the situation was much more complicated than I was led to believe, and not at all my business in the first place. After explaining my situation, the witch informed me my best chance of getting home was one of the waystones inside of the castle. But after the incident, none of their attempts to penetrate the barrier had been successful, and her waystone was left inert. She had no real answers on what the incident was beyond the ground suddenly shook one day, the barrier went up, and nothing was truly the same again. I'm not one to believe in things such as fate, but my arrival here, just after being given the mechanism to fix waystones, felt entirely too coincidental. Thankfully, she was good-spirited and humored me long enough for me to prove effective. The witch followed me, and as I followed her, unsure where to find anything in this gorgeously mystical castle, she informed me that if I hadn't seen my home in the Waystone, then the only one with the power to create a new portal would be their goddess, whom they hadn't seen since the incident. Summoning the goddess was both of our best chances, so she would give me any assistance I required. It seemed this particular spirit had a love of cheese and required each of 7 different variations, as well as 2 specialty treats offered to her to return to the mortal plane. Before leaving, the witch asked me to keep our plans to myself, not interested in arguing with the priest. She also told me the old cheese factory had been abandoned by the village, so I would be more than welcome to take residence there. Despite its supposed abandonment, the cheese factory was warm and smelled of fresh air. Someone, or something, had been around to nurture the spirit of the place. The first thing I noticed was a pedestal, which thankfully detailed the types of milk I would need to find, and I imagine the frames on the wall were for their displays. The storeroom was entirely empty and there was no food to be found, but I did come across a pair of fur boots. I had no interest in wandering this world defenseless, so I began this journey, as I had so many before, punching a tree. I needed tools, but even more desperately, I needed food. For some odd reason, I seemed to forget my natural aversion to water and jumped straight into the river. This did not help my hunger situation. After evoking the living privileges from a few helpless creatures, I headed beneath the earth for a few more resources. The small cavern was gracious enough to offer both coal and iron, and I went further than I was planning, eventually forced to return when I ended up on the wrong side of a creeper without a shield to defend me. With food and resources secured, I turned my attention back to the task at hand, making cheese. I started by replacing the missing cheese press, costing only a few slabs and a couple sticks, then began to familiarize myself with the process. Each cheese required a vial of rennet and the corresponding milk. Rennet required an egg, alpine salt, and a glass bottle. And alpine salt seemed to be a mix of water and calcite. The only components in the place seemed to be buckets used to collect the milk and the glass vials for the rennet. But I am not one to back down from a challenge, and part of me was intrigued by the idea of meeting a goddess. Water wouldn't be a challenge, there were rivers running directly through the village. Eggs wouldn't be too difficult either, I was sure I had passed a coop on the way to the factory. However, the calcite and a number of the milks were sure to prove a challenge. I went searching first for eggs, coming across the gentleman who ignored me the previous night. Apparently, the village was worse on its luck than I realized, and the chicken farmer ate all of the chickens. I don't typically tell people how to do their job, but I don't think that's how it should work. Either way, I was offered his last bottle of rennet if I brought him more poultry. I found another chicken almost immediately, but one was not sufficient, and a second was much harder to come by. In my search, I stumbled across another village, where I gathered my first milk from a cow and used their waystone to teleport back. Eventually, a second chicken was located and the farmer, somewhat reluctantly, fulfilled his end of the bargain. And like so, the first cheese wheel was crafted. The cheese press took a very long time to complete, so I made a second one to speed up the production time for the coming wheels. I also added a milk bucket to the wall as a sign of completion. While the first one was relatively simple, if that was the last bottle of rennet near, then a lack of salt was the biggest concern. I'd also noticed a mine near the witch's cottage, so acquiring calcite and amethyst milk became the next objective. There was a lookout over the mine entrance where I found a note. Whoever the miner was clearly made a huge mistake, and this village's secrets were about to spill open. Hoping to find whoever the note was written to, I went searching for a tea shop. And eventually stumbled into the shop. The tea lady informed me that the miner had abandoned her after the incident, but she was crying the night before about a fight with her father, the priest. She doesn't know what happened or if the miner had anything to do with the incident, but the spirit of everyone in town fell to ruin when she stopped bringing salt for the offerings. Per suggestion, I went to speak the forager for some equipment and was asked to do more than make offerings for this one season, instead to help them renew what was lost. It would take little more effort for me to help the community as well as myself, so I agreed. This sent me to the engineer. He gave me rail tracks, which would hopefully allow them to mine their ores again. Redstone was never my forte, but reconnecting the rail system seemed simple enough. I soon found, however, the broken tracks were the least of the problems. I don't know what I expected to find, but an unexploded block of TNT and a desolate geode were not in my wildest machinations. With limited options and some history with mining, I set out to find another geode. Super annoying mid-video plug. It is my goal to hit 100,000 subscribers this year, so please subscribe if you haven't, and don't forget to like the video. Also, I launched merch, which includes these super cute stickers that I make, package, and ship myself, as well as some very cozy apparel. Okay, thank you, bye. This took me deep within the earth, eventually stumbling upon a fair number of diamonds. Wisdom would have kept me from jumping down this ledge, but we've already gone over that. I found an opening and secured the last diamond, but soon completely lost my way in the dark and became besotted on all sides by monsters. With some luck, I had stumbled my way back to the miner's grotto, which allowed me a moment of safety and rest before continuing my search for a new geode. I took only what I thought I would need, focusing more on the calcite than the amethyst itself, and began a new track for the village. I created a hovel at the top where one could potentially rest and store their items on long expeditions into the stone. My first attempt at checking my rails was partially successful. On the second, I managed to actually be in the minecart, but not before it left me down there. And it worked. I also checked to make sure the old one was now working, though I would need to make a stop somewhere in the middle to connect the two. Back at the factory, I made the first batch of alpine salt and found some very unwelcomed company. I also discovered I needed amethyst clusters, not blocks, which sent me straight back to the witches. Greenie, as she seemed to be called, was more than happy to assist me, and enchanted my iron pick with silk touch. I used it to gather enough clusters I wouldn't soon need to return, and made the amethyst milk and cheese wheel. I then sliced both wheels into pieces for the offerings. And as soon as the offerings were in their pedestals, one of the barrier beacons disappeared. This brought me to the goat, sheep, and grain cheeses, in a village with no goats, sheep, or grain. During my investigations of the old barn, I was found by the baker. She said it burned down long after the incident, but the spirit was gone before the structure. She brought me to the tavern where I could find the sheep farmer now served hops. The tavern keeper told me the barn burned down on accident, but none of her animals were able to produce good milk anyways. She had enough feed to keep them going for a while, but the church controlled the grain and wouldn't answer anyone why there were no more disbursements. She had to abandon the trade and eventually worked out a deal with the knight to offer his specialty mead in her tavern. So it seemed for all three cheeses I would need to begin another adventure. As I was leaving, she suggested I speak to the town recorder. If anyone could get an official answer from the priest, it was her. Officially speaking, the wheat fields caught a disease, and no new seeds would grow. She wasn't sure if it was a disease that plagued the fields, but thanks to his use of church land as a community garden, no one ever went hungry. My path brought me from forest to fields, where I found an abandoned nether portal and a few bits of obsidian, something I was sure to need since the final cheese required warped milk. I'd never known the nether to have cows, but perhaps it was a region-specific phenomenon. I also stumbled across not one, but two new villages and a safe haven. I only took what I needed for my return trip, thankful to have found respite from the bitter cold. Hidden amongst the ruins of an ancient civilization were a handful of oat seeds and some usable grain. Maybe these seeds could replace the wheat that would not grow for the villagers. After gathering a number of interesting artifacts, I went back to exploring the snowscape in search of a mountain goat. The lasso the tavern keeper provided me was far more useful than I had imagined, acting as more a storage chest than a lead. I snagged a few buckets of milk from a wild sheep and completed the 3 items I had searched for. I named the goat Bertha and hid her within the storage room for the time being. The sheep, grain, and goat's cheese were now marked complete, and this time a beacon disappeared for each piece that was delivered, weakening its barrier even further. To my surprise, the witch had buffalo cheese waiting for me, and another secret hidden within her walls. The portal needed 4 obsidian to be complete, so I retrieved the diamonds I had found earlier, a couple buckets of lava, and crafted a diamond pick. My first trip was relatively painless, spawning in the realm I needed to be and near me a warped cow. But this wouldn't be my last time here in this tale. When I left the factory the next day, ready to deliver my next batch of offerings, the knight, my imprisoner, was standing outside staring directly at me. But then, he really wasn't staring at me. He was just standing there, staring, unmoving, unspeaking. I wondered how the tavern keeper managed to work any kind of deal with him. Anyways, I left to find some ebony wood to match the fences that already existed at the old barn. It was time for Bertha to get out of my storage room and enjoy the open air again. At first I thought maybe the carpet allowed her to jump over. But no, Bertha was just a troublemaker. I told myself I would come back and make this pretty later, maybe, but for now it was good enough to hold her. A door, where previously there hadn't been. It seems someone had indeed noticed the disappearing beacons and the energetic shift in the air. It was the priest, in a rather depressed state. As I had gathered, he was indeed to blame for the incident, putting his daughter to the task of extracting far too much mineral far too quickly. They were reckless with the blessings of the earth, and everyone paid the price for it. He also told me the final offerings had only ever been prepared by the Moss Knight, lost within his silent mind. Hoping against hope, I now set out to find a healing potion that might, even temporarily, return his senses. This time it was Red, the witch's other apprentice, who offered assistance. The brewing stand was in desperate need of power, and if I wanted her to make me a potion, I would need to fetch a blaze rod. I approached this task as I had in the past, barricading myself within throwing distance and picking off whichever I could reach. Eventually, I had cleared a way for me to pearl over and grab one blaze rod, and then raced back to the overworld. It was sufficient, providing just enough power for one splash potion of healing. I couldn't be sure if the Moss Knight didn't remember our first meeting or simply didn't care, but it became apparent he had no idea what I was asking of him. In the moment of clarity it afforded him, no words were exchanged, but he did write down the recipes I needed to complete the summoning. A cheesecake and a cheese tart, and I was only short a few ingredients. Before completing these recipes, I made a point to plant the oat seeds on the church land, sowing a new future for the community. Back at the castle, everyone I had met, and a few unfamiliar faces, were waiting for me. It was eerily quiet and more than a little discomforting, but who could blame them? This was the last thread of hope not only for myself, but the whole village. In a flash, she was here. Awesome and beautiful. She was unlike anything I'd seen before, and yet strangely familiar, perhaps connected through distant Endarian roots. She promised to return what had been lost from her people, and granted me the ability to control the Waystones. What adventure took me next, be it home, exploring this world, or somewhere new, was a fate entirely in my hands. Thank you for 20,000 little crows, and if you rock with the free peoples of Earth, check out the resources in the video description. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.